So welcome to this 315 presentation and discussion, embracing diversity and inclusion through action and operations to create a sustainable environment of belonging. This is such an important topic, from diversity and inclusion within our workforces to diversity in our clinical trials. We will be hearing from our two keynote speakers on their programs and emphasis on external outreach and internal programs they are implementing. Then we're going to follow that up with a question and answer. I'm going to come out with the two keynote presenters, and I have a few questions for them, but we really would love some audience questions. It's been great. Thank you for all your audience questions with the other sessions. So before inviting our keynote speakers out, I'd first like to introduce Joe Hrdlicka, who is representing Genentech, our sponsor of this ending keynote session, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate this opportunity. When Lisa called me several months ago, we've known each other for several years. I was really appreciative because I thought, our company, Genentech, we really enjoy celebrating our efforts in the DE&I space, and we'd like to talk about it. So this was the perfect opportunity. At Genentech, when you think about a company that has 15,000 to 16,000 employees, and over 50% of our workforce identifies as being of color, that's not something that happens by accident. So I know myself and many of my colleagues, we really do like to celebrate and be proud of achievements like that. And it's really awesome to participate in efforts to, say, help diversify our supplier base. Or right now, there's a project I'm involved with where we're working with Native American communities to engage with them in a better way so that we can have them involved in research that we're doing for lung cancer treatments, because there's a very high prevalence of lung cancer incidents in North Dakota, states like North Dakota and Minnesota and the upper Midwest. So these are some things we're committed to across the board at Genentech that make this topic really exciting for us. Veronica is going to tell this story a lot better than I would, but I do want to take 1 second to give a shout out to Lisa and her team at BioForward. These are awesome folks to work with. A company like Genentech, we have a lot of complex policy issues, as you might imagine, and it's really helpful to have that industry voice in front of state and federal policymakers, whether it's just chasing down a licensing application with a state agency or helping our federal team connect with key members of Congress from the Wisconsin area. Those are really valuable, that's real value for us. So I really want to take a second to compliment BioForward and the team for all the great work they do for our industry. With that, I want to delay no further and introduce to you my colleague, Veronica Sandoval.
Everyone. Thank you for staying and for being here today to learn more about what Genentech is doing. But before I start, I would like to thank Lisa and BioForward for the invitation. As Lisa and my colleague Joe mentioned, I'm going to be sharing with you what Genentech is doing to advance inclusive research, and more importantly, what are the steps that we are taking to ensure that we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion throughout the work that we do at Genentech. So I sit in the Chief Diversity Office, and one of the great things that I get to do is think about our strategy for advancing inclusive research, equity, and diversity across the Genentech portfolio. But one of the things that I'm very proud of is that at Genentech, we really believe that advancing inclusive research is very important to improve health outcomes, especially when we're thinking about those historically underrepresented groups. And the reason, I don't have to tell everyone in this room, COVID-19 really brought a light to the disparities that exist in this country, in all honesty, around the globe. One thing that we believe at Genentech is that if we have inclusive research, we could realize the full benefits of those innovative medicines that we have at Genentech and really lead to personalized healthcare to all patients. Not only are we delivering innovative medicines and thinking about what else do we need to do at Genentech, but one of the things that we believe is that we need to better understand the diverse world around us to deliver better outcomes, not only for our people, but patients, our business, and the communities we serve. And we're doing this through anchoring on 3 pillars. The first is the fostering belonging pillar. Second, advancing inclusive research and health equity, which is a pillar that is the one that I represent at Genentech and the closest to the work that I do. And the last is transforming society. So let me unpack what we mean by these pillars. So in 2020, we released our 2025 commitments that were anchored to these pillars. And when we're talking about fostering belonging, we're talking about looking internally at what we're doing at Genentech. We cannot go around talking about inclusive research, diversity, and equity without looking at what's happening in our 4 walls at Genentech. So one of the things that we're doing is that by 2025, we're committing that we're going to double Black, African American, and Hispanic or Latinx representation at the director and officer level. Because we believe that everyone, in order to really make a difference, we need to have representation at the table and have everyone's voice included. But being a South San Francisco company, we have representation from Asian Americans as individual contributors. But when we look at that director and officer level, it's not well represented. So by 2025, we're committing that we want to mirror that Asian representation at the director and officer level. And lastly, we want to address the gender representation opportunity zones. I'm going to jump over to the transforming society, or that 3rd pillar. This is looking at those investments and partnerships with the community. These are important partnerships. If I start from the bottom, being those champions with the kindergartens to careers, we're talking about our philanthropic arm that we have at Genentech. But not only are we talking about investing in our communities through these grants that we offer, but also talking about commitments in supplier diversity. By 2025, we're committing an annual commitment of $1 billion to external spend that focuses on diverse suppliers. And then we're also requiring D&I commitments from those suppliers that are requesting proposals for over $500,000. And now bringing you back and anchoring to what I'm going to be speaking to you today is that middle pillar, which is advancing inclusive research and health equity, this is a pillar that we want to do. This is a bread and butter of Genentech, which is how do we deliver those innovative medications by ensuring that we have that diversity and inclusivity at the center of the research that we do. And the way that we're doing this is that by 2025, we're committing that all of our molecule teams include population-specific assessments on inclusive research. And this is what we're talking about is going all the way into research and development, where we're asking everyone to think about how they're going to be including diversity and inclusion to all the way to commercialization of the products. So why is this important to us? We know that when we start looking at the demographics of the US, we know that the demographics are changing. The US is no longer going to be a majority-minority population. It's actually going to be a minority-majority population. And when we look at the statistics based on the census data, it is predicted that by 2044, more than 50% of our population is going to be non-white. So we need to be ready to make sure that our innovations are representing those populations. When we look at the Hispanic community in the US, it is 18% estimated right now. And it's projected, again, there's going to be an increase as we continue. And the Black and African population is also, it's around 13% in the country. And when we look at our white population, that is decreasing. So again, this is this demographic change that needs to happen. But more so when we talk about clinical research, we really know that clinical research is not benefiting all groups equally. And when I talk about research and development, when we look at that, 95% of the genetic data that is available to our researchers is from European ancestry. So that on its own has to change. We need to come as a community, not only as an industry, but as a bigger social effort to change the genomic data that is available. And in fact, the NIH is running the All of Us program, where they're trying to change the genetic database that is available for all researchers. But I just showed you in the last slide that the Latinos make 18% of the US population. But when we look at the clinical trial, less than 1% of Latinos are represented in clinical trials. When we look at the Black community, 13% of the US population is Black, but only 5% is represented in clinical trials. We also know that research tells us that if we have physicians, investigators, staff that looks like the patients who we're trying to recruit to our clinical trials, we'll have a better chance of recruiting these communities. And when we look at who our workforce diversity is, we still have a problem in this country. Our physicians do not represent the communities that they're treating. The statistic that I have up in this slide is that 5% of the physicians are Black in this country. And again, this is not representative of the US population. When we go and we ask patients of color, would you be interested in participating in a clinical trial? Oftentimes they say, yes, I would be interested if I was asked to participate. And in fact, the statistic that is up on this slide says that 83% of Black women with breast cancer were not asked to participate in a clinical study. So we need to change this. So when we talk about health equity at Genentech, we think about we take into consideration the changes in demographics, the fact that there are needs to increase representation in the clinical trials that we conduct. But we also know that in order to advance health equity, we need to take bold changes. And this slide shows and gives you a sense as to how we're thinking about health equity. Because whenever you go and you even Google search health equity, there are multiple definitions as to what health equity means. And I'm sure if we were to take a poll in this room, each of you would give me a different answer as to what health equity means to you. But at Genentech, what we're thinking and what we're anchoring to is that it's a multiple and a holistic approach in order to deal with health equity. We need to increase the health literacy. We need to have a policy piece. We also need to invest. Our Chief Diversity Officer, Quita Highsmith, and our CEO, Alexander Harden, always say you invest in what you believe is important. And we believe that health equity is important, so we believe that investing in it is an important piece. Partnerships has been a theme throughout this conference, and that is another important piece in order to address health equity and, of course, access. But at the center of everything is advancing inclusive research. So what is our approach to advance inclusive research at Genentech? We break it down into 3 different areas. The first is that clinical development strategy, where we want to expand inclusion of diverse patient populations. This is really thinking about where are we investing, what target areas, what are those therapeutic areas and disease states that we want to focus on, but also thinking about inclusion and exclusion criteria. We're thinking about scientific insights and personalized healthcare, which was a topic that was discussed and of interest to everyone. Because I think that that's where the next generation is going to be. How do we make sure that the right medication is delivered to those patients that need it at the right time? And of course, last pillar is engagement, building those connections in the community and building those trusted partnerships. I'm going to share some examples. How did we bring all of these pieces together? And these are some stories of success that we are very proud and I'm very happy to share with everyone today. So I started this presentation by saying that COVID-19 really shined a light on disparities as to how healthcare is being delivered. You know, I don't think that was a surprise to anyone, because all of us know and knew that disparities existed based on zip code, based on access to healthcare. The COVID-19 pandemic really affected the Black community and the Latino community very hard. When you read in the newspaper, you know, who were those populations that were being hospitalized and who were dying from COVID-19, it was our underrepresented communities. There was also we were very interested in the pneumonia, COVID-induced pneumonia. And we wanted to conduct a study where we wanted to see, well, can our medications, Actemra, which is a very good anti-inflammatory drug, can that decrease inflammation and reduce cases of COVID-induced pneumonia? But we wanted to do the study in COVID-19, and as someone in the previous panel said, during clinical trials during COVID, we're really affected. So how can we go into a community that during COVID does not trust the healthcare system? There are issues with access. How can we run a clinical trial? And we actually ran a trial that we called Impacta. And what we learned with Impacta was that if we could go to those communities and take the clinical studies, not to the typical academic centers that we think about, but bring the clinical trials to the patients, engage with those community hospitals that work with the communities, have the trust of the communities, have access, and provide health care to those patients, we will be able to enroll into our study. And in fact, of the 389 participants, 84% of those participants were Black, Latino, or Native American. And we enrolled this study in less than a month. So that just shows you the power of being intentional where you're having clinical trials. The second example is a study we call CHIMES, and this is a multiple sclerosis study. Most of the data indicated that for many years, the community, the neurology community thought that multiple sclerosis was only a disease for the white population. But in fact, as we grew and had more data, it actually showed that the Black and the Latino communities were diagnosed at a later stage. MS progressed faster. And we wanted to make sure that we conducted a study with Ocrevus, which is a drug that we have for multiple sclerosis. And the study was specifically conducted in the Black and the Latino population. And we took learnings from the COVID Impacta study. Again, we took the study intentionally to the community. We engaged with our community partners. We not only engaged with our community partners, but we developed material that was culturally relevant in English and in Spanish, and we made sure that our patients understood what the clinical study was about. Not only did we do that, but we also made sure that we decreased the financial barriers when it came to childcare, reimbursements, parking, transportation, that patients felt that they were supported and that they were able to participate. This study with Chimes, I'm happy to report that not only did we have a long wait list of people being interested in enrolling in this study, but we enrolled 2 months earlier in mid our enrollment. From this, we did not stop here. We have a third ongoing study called Elevatum, and this is for diabetic eye disease. Again, diabetes, a big issue with our underserved communities. Diabetic eye disease is everyone knows when you have diabetes, you can ask someone, what is your A1C? They will tell you. How are your kidneys doing? They will tell you their health of their kidneys and even their cardiovascular. But when it comes to their eyes, annual exams are forgotten. The Elevatum study is looking at diabetic macular edema in the Black and the Latino population. And again, it is to see if we can increase in enrollment. And this is a current ongoing study. So hopefully next time that we meet, I will have an update for you. We talked about personalized healthcare. This is an example of a personalized healthcare study that is called MyTactic. And this is a study that we're conducting in partnership with OneOncology. Again, this is going and bringing studies to our community oncology centers, which we know are the centers that the community oncologists are treating most of the cancers in this country. And this is an interesting study because in this study, what we're asking is, let's make sure that all patients have a biomarker test. Let's ensure that we understand what disease, not only what the biomarker, but what cancer that patient has. Then let's see what are the Roche and Genentech oncology products that can be specifically given for that cancer. So this goes again to the idea of if this can work in the community and we can identify what these biomarkers are and treat those patients with the right treatment, are their outcomes better? And I just want to do a quick plug in here for ACS, or the American Cancer Society, and the Cancer Action Network, because we're really going and building a partnership with them in order to help us build awareness of the importance of biomarker testing. Because I've been talking about underrepresented communities, and what we know is that there are guidelines that state biomarkers are important. We know that physicians know that it's the best care that patients should be getting, but sometimes our states, our Medicare does not cover biomarker testing. We need to bring our payers, we need to bring our policymakers along and educate what are these biomarkers and why are they important in order to have better outcomes for our patients. We took all of these learnings last year and we launched in 2021 what we call the Advancing Inclusive Research Site Alliance Partnership. And this is the first of its kind in the pharmaceutical industry. And again, this is building on the idea, how are we building and how are we partnering with our partners in the communities? And these include 4 top oncology centers across the country. One in LA, the City of Hope, the University of Alabama in Birmingham, the Mace Cancer Center in San Antonio, and the West Cancer Center in Tennessee. What all of these 4 centers of excellence have in common is that they know how to engage the communities of color, but not only do they know and they have the trust, but they're good at enrolling and offering clinical studies to these patients in these communities. But not only do they offer and patients volunteer, they retain patients. So we want to take the best practices of these 4 centers and say, can we bring and understand what you're doing so well that we can replicate across our other studies? Not only are we talking about clinical studies, but we're also talking about what can we do and co-create at these centers. We listen to the patients. What do patients need? Patients have told us, we don't know what a clinical study is. So with these 4 centers, we've developed videos about what a clinical trial is in both in English and in Spanish, and they're available on YouTube for anyone to go and watch. And also talk about the healthcare professional videos. They're talking about unconscious bias. So let's talk about unconscious bias with our healthcare providers. We're also talking about bringing together in 2018, we brought together an external council for advancing inclusive research. And we use this council to help us think about diversity and inclusion, to help us think about what are the areas of opportunity that Genentech can speak to and think about. This is a publication that we co-authored with our external counsel. And it talks about, and I'm not going to go through this is from a figure from the publication, but it talks about what are some future recommendations that the external counsel thinks about when we're talking about diversity in clinical trials. And finally, when I was talking about how do we transform society, I mentioned that we invest in our communities. Genentech has what we call health equity innovative grants that we give out biannually. And these are examples of those grants that are given to the community. And they target 3 different areas: inclusive research, equity in care, and workforce diversity. And this talks about increasing awareness in clinical trials to those underserved communities, but also patient navigation, and as well as workforce diversity. So all this comes together into this. In order to address equality in healthcare, it's holistic. There are many steps from how to improve better healthcare, the innovative medications that we're bringing in order to increase value and ultimately affect the better care that patients are delivering. So I'm just going to leave everyone with a quote from the first African-American woman who was an astronaut, Mae Jemison, and she stated, "The future never just happened, it was created." And what I ask this group is, let's think about ways that all of us as a community, because it's going to take a community, it's going to take payers, industry, partnerships with academia, patients themselves, in order to catalyze change. Thank you for your time. And at this time, I want to pass the microphone to Trish Pena.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank BioForward and Genentech for the opportunity to be here today, and also, just acknowledge the great work that Genentech is doing in support of underserved communities. It's been very great to hear you share your thoughts, Veronica. So I'd like to just set the stage. Today, I'd like to share a little bit about the experiences that Versity has been on in terms of cultivating and creating and operationalizing DEI principles into our organization. And I also want to recognize that, the reception is around the corner, so hang in there, I'll get through these slides. Before I get into that, I'd love to just tell you a little bit about our organization. So the way I like to describe our organization is that we are all things blood plus. And what does that mean? So we collect it, we process it, we supply it. We also do a great deal of research as well as provide clinical care for blood disorders and diseases. We also, the plus represents the great privilege that we have to serve our community through supporting the efforts of organ and tissue procurement for transplantation, as well as be a part of the testing process in support of transplants. Next slide. So just a quick additional facts about our organization. So some may be familiar with us as the Blood Center of Wisconsin. We became Versity in 2014 as an operating company in support of the state blood centers that we have across the Midwest. We're in 5 states, and we happen to be the 5th largest blood supplier in the US. Another unique factor about us is that we also possess the world's largest library of genotype donors, so that if your loved one needs a special blood product, it's likely we'll be able to support that. and we're very proud of that. A little bit about our mission. It's really about serving our community. It's so important and central for what we do every day. And whether it's patient outcomes, advancing the field of personalized medicine, as well as, again, focusing on strengthening the communities that we live and work in. So when you think about that, and a central part of our brand promise is people need people, because we are stronger together. And that is a center point from my perspective on how we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organization. Today, I'm going to walk through some examples of things that we're doing within our organization that are really centered on people, culture, and community. So this slide reflects our strategy. We really believe that we sustain and advance our communities through this effort. It's so important, and we look at it from the employee perspective. Are we engaging, empowering, and developing people in an inclusive manner? Are we attracting, recruiting, and retaining employees? In addition to acknowledging the disparities that are present from a healthcare access perspective, as well as supporting the efforts to lessen it. So what I like to, when I look at our strategy and I think about the ways that we're bringing it to life, it's really about helping employees connect the dots to the things that we're doing relative to our strategy and how we live out our intentions. And we're not 100% there yet. This is something that takes a lot of intention, it takes a lot of thought, and a willingness to be open to change when needed. And so some examples that I'll walk through in a little more depth are highlighted here, but before I get to that, I'd like to share that some of the other things that we've done is we engaged in a year-long unconscious bias curriculum across the organization. We also created a diverse student intern program that just completed its second summer. That we learn every summer, and we have really created a great thing that we look to continue to build in the future. The other thing that I think is important to note is that we've also created an endowment in support of scholarships for underrepresented students. So now I'd like to get into a couple more examples that in a little more depth. So when you think about the people aspect of our strategy, one of the things we did, and Veronica also mentioned this earlier, is about centered on representation. How do we build our bench internally to ensure that we have the representation at all levels of the organization? We're not where we'd like to be, but we are starting to look at that and have in earnest so that we can continue to grow the organization and our representation. So we created last year a program that was centered on developing underrepresented employees in our organization. There were 47 pairings. They met throughout the year. We also provided them tools and some guidance to kick off the mentoring pairs, and such as a newsletter and some upfront training. And when I take a step back and think about our results, I have to say that we had some bright spots and we had some opportunities that we've learned from this experience. So when we consider the pairs that met on a regular basis, they evaluated their experience 4.4 out of 5 based on our survey results, and which I thought was a pretty good result the first year. But that was also because they had the opportunity to meet regularly They loved the focus time on their development and also to cultivate a relationship across the organization outside of their reporting line. The other thing that we learned was that there were also pairs that didn't meet. And it wasn't raised until very late in the process. And so that was a good learning for us to make sure that we're setting those expectations on the front end and also checking in to make sure that things are working well and that if there are issues that we can make an adjustment real time so that the experience is enhanced and operates as intended. I think the other thing that we also learned was, particularly given the fact that our footprint's across 5 states, and there was a great learning that we had that if someone was paired with a person from the corporate headquarters and they happened to be in another state, that there was a little bit of hesitancy to operate and share, true to the concept of a mentoring pair. So it was something that, we know that in the future, as we look at this and reimagine what this will be like for the next cohort, that we also need to spend some time on building psychological safety and helping leaders understand the importance of that, because otherwise, it's really hard to engage in a meaningful way without that. The other thing that we've also started to consider, we've had some discussions about sponsorship versus mentorship, and what does that mean for our organization? Traditionally, the concept is that a mentor is a safe place to have conversations about your career, maybe even your life, if the relationship matures that way. But it doesn't necessarily always correlate to a promotion or further advancement. And so there's been discussion about what does sponsorship mean for Versity, and is that how do we enable that? Because a sponsor will say your name when you're not in the room. They will help advocate for you for a promotion and things like that. And so we haven't figured that out yet, but it is something that I, in my role, am definitely given a lot of thought about, and particularly in consideration for next year. So another thing that I'd love to highlight is a team that we have called Street Teams. It was conceived by one of our community outreach leaders. Her name is Elodie Antala, which I think is very important to make sure that we give credit to people who create things. She, through her Yellow Belt project, identified an opportunity to get employees engaged in our mission and what we do in a way that's outside of their day-to-day, to literally get people in the streets and have that opportunity to learn more and engage with people that they may not necessarily encounter otherwise. And so she created the Street Teams, and it was launched. And so essentially, there are some goals related to the Street Teams, and one of the things that are great, that's great about the Street Teams is it's really intended, in addition to engaging our employees, but to also help them educate on the importance of blood, organ, and tissue donation, as well as help us strengthen our community partnerships. Now, why I thought this was important to share with you today is because, first, it was an employee-led effort. It's not where we want it to be, but we're continuing to look at ways that we can continue to get more participation. We started in Milwaukee, and we're looking to scale it across our footprint. And one of the things that was activated through the course of the Street Teams is a cross-functional program that was created by our employees to really help make an impact on those who live with sickle cell disease. And so the program is called Get Typed. Again, it was conceived by our employees. They created this. And it's through simple technology, a cheek swab. They have the opportunity to talk to community members about, hey, do you know your blood type? To help and ask them if they would be, willing to take this test so that, they will learn what their blood type is, what if they are an RO blood type, in support of our efforts for sickle cell disease. Because we do believe you are your own best type. And this is something that the employees really latched onto, that had the opportunity to engage in this. And it has been a very inspiring experience because it gave the team members the opportunity to really engage and learn in a different way, like understanding some of the issues that get in the way of accessing healthcare, whether it's transportation, overall access because they don't have any insurance, and other things, or also hearing stories of loved ones who also have sickle cell disease. And so it's been a fantastic way to engage our employees, and it's fun. I know for me, the first event that I worked, I'll never forget it. It was quite an experience, and I learned so much that day, and I'm really proud of this effort that we have in our organization. The other thing that when you think about your organization and you think about community, oftentimes people automatically assume outside of your organization. And the context that I'd like to share today is really relative to what is your culture like internally? What does, do people feel like they belong? Just because they're an employee doesn't mean they feel connected to your organization, particularly when there isn't any representation in the area that you work in, for instance. And I know for myself, I know what it's like to be one of the only in a room, a lot of the rooms that I've been in. And what I'm really encouraged by, today is the number of people who are willing to admit that. And I think that that is a central thing when you think about building an inclusive culture in your organization to consider. Are we intentional about the way that we talk about things? Are we intentional about the way that we are creating a space for people in your organization to have that sense of community? And so one of the things that we did in support of that, our employee resource groups, which are called councils in our organization, were created in 2019. We've learned a lot since then along the way. And so one of the things that we are in the process of trying to shift is really empowering our employees to lead this work, giving them an opportunity to create focus areas to make impact in the organization while building community. And I think it's so important. And some of the wins that we've had through the employee resource groups were a couple of series that were created. One was called I Belong, and it's an opportunity for us to bring in an external speaker to provide education and awareness on different topics. And the most recent one that we did was really centered on affirming, how to build an affirming culture for the LGBTQ+ community, as well as the Join the Conversation series. And what that was is it's an opportunity to engage in an open forum around hot topics. So we had some open forum discussions on things like COVID, on things like the violence that has occurred within the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, as well as discussing Black Lives Matter in a very open forum. And I can tell you that, given most of my experience as an HR leader, initially gave me a little bit of pause, just generally, because I thought, wow, are we ready for this? How are we going to manage this if there's fallout? And I have to say that I'm glad that we worked through the initial, hesitation, and moved forward, because while it was not for everyone, I do think it opened up a dialogue that we weren't having before. And it's so critical for people to be able to have that opportunity. And, and we are looking at how do we bring that to the next phase and continue the conversation. The other great thing that's left an impact on our organization is a lot of the members had the opportunity to serve as unconscious bias coaches in support of the unconscious bias curriculum effort that we had last year. And what I thought was really great about that is that they had the opportunity to support different leaders across our footprint, so they were able to learn about different areas within our company, as well as engage and help drive change. Because when you spend that time looking at your bias, it helps you be able to connect better with others, which to me is the central point of this type of learning. And they, particularly because a lot of the coaches were individual contributors, it got them the opportunity to be a leader in this process and help shape the change that we want to see. Things are not where we'd like them to be, but we continue with intention to work towards a different outcome because it's so important. So when I think about some of the lessons that we've learned, me personally through this work, is it's so important when you look at your strategy to ensure that it's aligned organizationally. The things, the focus areas, the imperative that you have for your strategy, is it aligned with your organization, your core values? How are you living that? It's important to take a step back and take a look at that to ensure that you're not just doing activities, because you run the risk of creating, when you're only working on activities, which are programs, community building like an ERG, it's great. But without setting an expectation of the behaviors and the leadership that we expect, it's not as impactful as it could be. So it's important to evaluate that, particularly from a foundation perspective. And that involves looking at your infrastructure, so policies, procedures, process, to determine, where you're at, the health of those things, and where can we broaden our perspective to ensure that we're incorporating DEI principles into you're baking it into the bricks, so to speak. It's very critical. And it takes time. This is not something that can be done in 1 year. And I think it's important to think about that. And one of the things I like to say is, really looking at how are we operationalizing these concepts to bring them to life in our organization every day. Because the more that you can integrate these principles into your talent management process, for instance, the more that it becomes a part of your culture, a part of what you expect. And then it doesn't become this side project. I often hear leaders say, oh, I really want to support this, but I've got like 10 projects. And so that's something that when you think about being able to integrate it in a different way and operationalize these principles into everything you do, then it's not a side project. It becomes the fabric of your culture. And then the last thing that I'd like to highlight is, again, be open to evaluating and adjusting where you need to. Ensure that you have mechanisms to provide feedback, ask for it. If you can do pulse surveys, there's a lot of ways, focus groups, a lot of ways to do that. But it's important to do those checks to ensure that you're hitting the mark, as well as including a broad spectrum of voices when you're conceiving your strategy. Without that, then, it's not the strategy by Trish Pena. That's not, what I want, and I don't think that most people, they have great intentions, but ensuring that you're doing those checkpoints and providing an open forum to learn while you're working on this is critical. And my final thought that I'd like to leave you with is, diversity is a fact. Inclusion is a choice. So what are you doing in an intentional way to start to shift your culture of your organization? Employees are expecting it. And without that, it really impacts your employee experience as well as your ability to retain. And so with that, thank you very much.
So I had quite a few questions, but this was awesome with these presentations. So I'm only going to do a couple, and then I would love to have some audience questions instead. So one of the things that I just wanted, so let's start with you, Veronica, so we'll give Tricia a little break with her voice. So you were focused more on external, and that's your focus, but you do live within the Genentech world and their emphasis internally on diversity and inclusion. So could you just talk a little bit about just internal, which that's what Trish was focused on, just from a Genentech perspective?
Well, thank you for allowing me to expand a little bit more what we're doing internally within Genentech. As I mentioned to you, even within all of the three pillars that I had, one of the most ambitious is how do we make sure that we bring everyone along this diversity, inclusion, and equity journey? Because I'm sure it's not only Genentech. Everyone here is in a different path, and you are in a different place in that journey. One of the ways that we're doing, and we're very excited about it, is that we actually have asked all of our VPs, officers, and directors to develop a D&I officer action plan. And not only do they have to develop this officer action plan, but then we make it public in our intranet. And why do we do that? Is because we want to have accountability. So even our CEO and our Chief Diversity Officer, they have a diversity plan. And they go in there, and sometimes I go in and I say, Quita, what are we doing about this, right? So you said we were gonna do this quarter, right? And that just keeps everyone accountable. And even when we look at the number, because like everyone, Genentech is data-driven. We look at our numbers and we're like, well, 99% of our officers and directors have an officer action plan. What happened to that 1% that is not doing it? Why are they not doing this, right? And sometimes the answer is as simple as, I don't know what it is. I know this is important, but I just don't know how to start. So we're like, don't worry, let's bring you on board. We'll make it easy on you. We give them 30 different things to choose from. It could focus on that fostering belonging pillar. It can focus on inclusive research and health equity, or it can focus on transforming society. And we say, choose out of these 30, you can choose 5 for that quarter. And let's work on those 5. And then let's build on that. And we actually have business partner managers within Genentech that they go and they have one-on-ones with our directors, officers, and VPs. Because again, it's holding that transparency, that accountability. So that is one way that we're doing it within Genentech.
That's great. And that's really that term. I liked what you said, Trish, that in being intentional. I thought that it's an excellent, so I turned to Veronica backstage and I'm like, God, I love that statement. that was it. It's being intentional, right? So flip side, you were focused more on the internal. Do you want to talk a little bit about first? And again, I know you can't, there's massive stuff on the external part. A little bit what you'd like to key in on, just on the focus on diversity within the external aspect within Versity.
Yes, absolutely. So we have an insights-based strategy that was cultivated through focus groups in support of increasing representation in our donor base. And so what that comprises of is our engagement in the community, ensuring that we have a strong presence in all of the areas that we're looking to serve differently than we do today. We also have created specific drives, blood drives that is, intended to, again, serve communities where we currently are focused on improving service in, as well as looking at how do we retain donors differently than we do today, specifically in this area. And one of the great things that was created recently is a partnership. We call it Project Dream. And it's a partnership in Milwaukee under the Thrive On Partners, which includes our healthcare system partners, to create and invest in a neighborhood in Milwaukee where it's really a community center type of concept that's near a school that will provide jobs, provide educational opportunities in terms of how to write a resume, how to interview, those types of things, to invest and really demonstrate more of a presence instead of, oh, you're kind of a one and done, you come to our community and you leave, but really building a strong foundation in support of serving our communities differently.
Great. I'm going to turn to the audience just to make sure. Any questions that you would like to ask of Trish or Veronica or both of them? Nothing? Nothing? There we go. And there's a microphone right here that would make it easier for us. Oh, and there's another person. Okay, should be you. Go ahead.
All right, hi there. I have a question. I'm gonna try to word it not awkwardly, but kind of bear with me as I go. Many people, and it's increasing, folks who are of mixed race or various definitions of diversity inclusion. And so as you're looking at increasing numbers or kind of targeting populations, how are you handling the fact that a lot of people don't fit just one checkbox?
Can I jump on that? Because that is something that we're really interested in, which is what we call data standardization, right? How do we make sure that we're collecting the data that is reflective of the population? And it goes back even to the census data that I showed. We always are pulling our hair because we're like, how do we know that that's capturing those mixed races? Or even, the best example that we always use are our Afro-Latinos, right? That are Latino, but they're also Black. What box do they check, right? And that is a problem that we have. And I think it goes not only in the industry, but is a nationwide problem that we need to figure out how to standardize that. And I've been speaking to even experts within UCLA that are looking at census data and being experts to our federal agencies. And that is one question that they're asking: how do we make sure that we have the right representation, even within race and ethnicity, and what data is being captured?
Cool, thanks.
So my question is based off of the really great quote, Veronica, that you put, that you invest in what you believe in. And it may be kind of a cold way to state it, but money makes the world go around. And so as we talk to the community here and as we grow these businesses, how would you advise kind of the startups and small businesses to build effective intentional DEI policies into their business plan, budget them, and then protect that budget as a high priority line item rather than, as Trish pointed out, as a side project?
It has to start with your leadership, right? And I really believe, and this is Veronica, not Genentech, speaking. When you have a startup company, you're nimble, right? And you could actually build that culture. And even Trish mentioned this, and I mentioned it. It's that culture of your company, because that's where it starts. If diversity, inclusion, and equity are important, and you're making that even within your mission statement, that's going to be part of that budget that moves forward, and it's going to be a line item in your budget. It can, we always say, if it stays flat, that's great, as long as it doesn't decrease, because you could continue doing the same work, but it's having that sustainability. One company, and I think this is true for even all startups, right? You cannot do it by yourself. It's building those partnerships. And how do you, as a startup, can bring other partners along with you and start building that sustainability and really make diversity, inclusion, and equity be truly part of our fabric for clinical diversity and clinical trials.
You want to add anything or go? Okay.
Well, I would just add that it's also important to create the expectations from a leadership perspective that I get, the challenges of budget and ensuring that the return is there, so to speak. And I think it's also about ensuring on the front end that you have those expectations from a leadership perspective, as Veronica indicated, because without that, then you're not going to be able to build something that's sustainable.
Hi, so building on I love that you have leadership teams who are already really bought into this, and I think we're seeing kind of a cultural uprising where employees expect this of their employers, and I love that you require that of suppliers too. How, for so many people in the audience probably thinking about this, like my leadership team is not bought into this, how do you build that business case to kind of really show them beyond this is just the right thing to do, this is something that our business must do, to then invest in, putting a whole team and infrastructure. To your last point, like I think a lot of times it gets tacked on as someone's like stretch project, and they take it on because they're passionate about it. But how do we make this, something that the business really invests in and prioritize? So that was a big question, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll start, and then Trish can jump in. Yeah, so because that is not only, I think it's true in any company. Again, it goes to where are you in that D&I journey? But it comes back to what is it that even our investors, investors look at ESG, investors are looking at D&I. I was part of a big think tank about diversity and inclusion with Yale University. And investors are looking at diversity and inclusion. They want to see that your company has a plan, and actually what is it that you're going to do about this. Even when we're thinking about, all of us here are in the biopharmaceutical space, even our regulators are sending strong signals that diversity and inclusion and equity are important. You do not want to be reactive. You really want to have a plan, because this is going to be affecting the way that we do and conduct research. Even with the FDA's most recent guidance on diversity for clinical trials, they're not being like, we need 20% representation, but they are talking about what is the incidence rate? What is the epidemiology? Because it depends on the disease state that you're studying. It depends on what it is that, if it's a rare disease, it may be harder to have representation, and that is okay. But you need to have a plan in place, because I really believe that investors and shareholders are going to hold us accountable.
I think that's a great point. It's something, your question is a great one. It's something that, I think about a lot and struggle with a little bit, frankly, because for someone like me, I want to get beyond the business case, because there has been historically a business case for a lot of things that should never occur again. And because to me, it just makes sense that if you're looking to have a culture where there's representation, because the conventional thinking is you have a different, there's an impact to innovation when you've got different voices. And I encourage you to continue to chip away at that, so to speak, and really and try to inform your leadership on the changing demographics of the US, for instance. In a very short period of time, I mean, to me, 20 years is not that far off, our country is going to look very different. And so do you want to be in front of that or be left behind?
And since I know Kate, I'm going to say one other comment. You made that on the supplier, and I'm not going to ask the question of that. It's more of we've certainly had people coming to us saying, how do we diversify our supply chain? We want to look at that, right? So, but I want all of you to be really thinking from your companies, because a great response came back to me from a minority supplier saying, I think that's great, your industry wants to diversify your supply chain, but are you ready to invest in us? Because on your side, you're saying, I need certain quality, you have to hit these metrics. I can't just have you as a supplier. But their point is, am I going to have capital investment to meet that? Or are you willing to pay me more as a minority supplier? Are you willing to step up industry? So I think those are great challenges that we can have these discussions, but are we ready to reflect on ourselves and say, are we willing to pay more and support minority suppliers? So just another thing I'm throwing out to all of you guys, that I think we need to really be thinking of this as an industry, that no offense, let's not just say, let's get more minority suppliers. There's another step to this, and that means we may need to invest in them. So
let me add something and I promise I'll be very brief. Even with that, it's because even within Genentech, when we look at our procurement, because we're like, we need to diversify our suppliers, and we need to have a plan. It's having that commitment, but being willing to train. Because sometimes our diverse suppliers, all they need is that training. And if you could train them and show them like, okay, this is the steps, this is how you need to make it, this is what's gonna get you to the next level, that's all they need to get to that level. The one thing that we always say at Genentech is Genentech spends $4.6 billion. And if we could have one diverse supplier and train them through the process, then that's the impact that they're gonna have within their community, the jobs, everything else that comes with that, and then multiply by that 1,000 over that $1 billion budget, that makes a huge difference. But it starts with that training.
I'm going to ask them one last question. So both of them, oh yeah, please. Oh, I'm sorry, you go. Sorry, no, last question.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, Kalpa, yes. See, I'm blinded by the light.
So really quickly, I guess for the trials for which you recruited the Impacta and Chimes, how do you go about picking the communities for the disease state that you're studying? And could you see the company partnering with academic institutions that really invest in community-engaged clinical research? And then for you, how do you go about measuring the impact of some of the programs you mentioned that allow employees to be themselves at Versity? Thank you.
So as far as the community, where do we go? I'll get to that, but I also want to say academic centers are still important. Even if you saw when I showed that slide about our Advancing Inclusive Research Site Alliance, 3 of those centers are academic centers, because our academic centers are still a very important part of the fabric. However, there's the however, we still need to train our academic centers to bring that community. We need to think about decentralized trials. We need to take those trials to where those communities are. As far as where do we choose, where do we start with the community center, the community clinics that we are partnering with? Again, data. We love data. We go and we have these beautiful heat maps that we follow. Where are all the FQHCs that actually treat these patients? Where do these patients live? then we partner, but then it goes to that intentional partnership. You have to have people that know how to speak to those communities. We have to figure out, because there has been atrocities within our clinical trials, and both in the Latino and the Black communities. So we have to make sure that when we're bringing in clinical trials, we don't have that helicopter effect that I think someone said, you come in and then you leave. But we're really showing we're here because we want to be part of the community. We want to be part of that public health literacy where we're educating. This is what we're bringing as an industry. And this is going to take time. It takes time. You know, what COVID showed us was that when the community is ready, people are raising their hands to say, our community is ready. We have people that are willing to partner with you, Genentech or other companies. And that's where you start. And then you build out from that.
And in terms of how we track the effectiveness of some of the programs that we have, so from that perspective, we're not exactly where we want to be, but I will say that we do track our representation and look at that regularly in terms of the employees that we hire and the employees that leave the organization, and look at root causes. We also do surveys related to the mentoring program, for instance, and also are doing kind of pivoting away from pulse surveys for now, and really creating an opportunity for more focus groups so that we get that real-time feedback from people based on different things that we're doing.
So just quickly, we'll just end this here, but I just want to let you know that Trish, great-grandparents came from Mexico. And then Veronica, you are a first-generation Mexican-American. Great stories. It just shows you the importance of immigration. We have these two wonderful women here because of immigration. So my question to you is, you didn't just do those presentations, right? You know, you didn't just read them. You're passionate about this. You know, what keeps that passion, and what gives you hope in the future? Trish, you go first.
Okay, sure. So for me, you know, what gives me hope right now, so I'm from the Generation X, and the generations coming behind us are the ones that give me the hope, based on what they're willing to talk about, what they're willing to share, demanding change. I'm really inspired by them, and so that, you know, that gives me hope and fuels me, because this, you know, it's hard. It's hard to, whether it's you're trying to convince someone of the business case, et cetera. You know, I think about the impact for others and the people that are coming behind me. And that's what fuels me, and that's, you know, because I'm motivated by impact, that is something that I think about all the time. How I'm showing up, the different aspects of my identity, how am I creating visibility to that to make it okay for others to do the same.
You know, and I'll echo what Trish said. You know, it's looking at one of the things that I see, even within my community, is how to elevate each other. And right now, I think this is the time, and I think we've been doing this as far as leaning on each other for, and especially, you know, coming from a Latina community, a Mexican community. When I look, you know, the one thing that keeps me going is that I know I'm going to leave this place in a better way than I found it. And I really mean that sincerely. You know, going through academia, going through graduate school, and then law school. And like Trish said, always being one of the very few Latinas in those rooms, there is hope because there's more behind me. And if I could open the doors and really make sure that those who are behind me, regardless of their race and ethnicity, that they can really make sure that they have opportunities. And I really believe that right now, having these conversations about diversity, inclusion, and equity, that's hopeful. Because having an audience and organizations that care about it, that gives me hope that there is time to change and really make this a movement forward to say, this is what is needed in this country, and this is how we're going to do it, and have a path forward. That gives me energy to move and do this work every day.
See, now isn't that a great ending, those two responses? So let's give them a round of applause.